4, we're talking about fungus. All right. So over here, this one, what they're telling us first is that, so fungi, right? Normally when you think of fungi, you think about like the, like the mushrooms that stick up above the ground. So that's only like part of the fungus, right? So it says here that in this national forest in Oregon, they found this honey mushroom that measures 3.5 miles across and covers 2,200 acres. So over that landscape, what you see is like a bunch of mushrooms, right? But the mushrooms are not the main portion of the fungus. The main portion of the fungus is underneath the ground. So over this entire area, 2,200 acres, that entire area underneath the ground is filled with this fungus. And so this fungus is one organism. So this entire area that, the fungus that lives in the ground is one organism, right? So we're going to take a look at like the structure of a fungus and how is it that, one single organism can take up that much area. So some people, they say that this is like the largest organism, on the planet. So the main point here is that the mushroom, right, that you see is not like the main portion of the fungus. That's only the reproductive structure of the fungus. The fungus itself mostly lives underground, and that's where it's spending most of its time consuming, decomposing matter and stuff like that. Right. So this over here just showing you, that same fungus, like where it's located. So it shows you that, the fungus kind of takes over this entire area. If we're looking at this map, 2,200 acres is a big area, right? It takes over this whole area. So this one fungus in the ground, exists in this entire area. So this is a very big organism. And so this is in this national forest here in Oregon. This over here is showing you the same thing. This is the fungus. These are just the mushrooms of the fungus, right? The mushroom itself is not the main portion of the fungus, right? So what are fungi, right? So fungi, right? Remember we talked about bacteria and archaea. So bacteria and archaea, those are prokaryotes, right? Whereas fungi are eukaryotes, right? So these are similar to plant cells. The cells are similar to plant cells. They're similar to animal cells, or at least more so compared to like bacteria. So the fungi cells are closer to plants, animals, stuff like that, compared to bacteria, right? Bacteria are just prokaryotes. Fungi are actually eukaryotes, right? And they are most of the time they're multicellular. So when they're multicellular, their cells can be specialized. That means different cells do different kinds of things, right? So fungi, right? So it says here that before people thought that fungi were part of the plant kingdom, right? Like, plants have flowers and stuff like that. And then fungi also have, they have like fruiting bodies, like, mushroom caps and stuff like that. And then in the ground, plants have roots. And then fungi, they have something that looks similar to roots. We're going to talk about that later. So in the beginning, people thought that maybe fungi were a type of plants. But as they studied more and more, they figured out that fungi are very, very different. So fungi, their cell walls are made of something called chitin, chitin. So their cell walls are very different from plant cell walls, right? We talked about plant cell walls before. So plant cell walls are made of something called cellulose, right? So fungi, their cell walls are made of something called chitin, right? So these are very, different kinds of things. We're going to look at the structure of chitin on the next page. So I was saying that, fungi cell walls are made of chitin. So the cell walls of plants are made of something called cellulose. So the fungi cell walls are made of something called chitin, unlike plant cell walls, which are made of cellulose. In addition, plants, they grow their own food, right? So plants, they grow their own food, But fungi, they're mostly decomposers. All right. So they're part of a special group of heterotrophs, which are things that consume other things, called decomposers. So plants, they generally do not decompose other kinds of things. Plants, they make their own food. So fungi, they basically decompose other dead things. And this right over here is showing you the structure of chitin. So chitin is over here on the top left. All right. So this right over here. It looks kind of similar. So plant cell walls are made of something called cellulose. Right. So cellulose is basically made of sugars. So this thing over here is also kind of made of sugars. Do you see this like hexagonal kind of structure? All right. So there's basically like two, right? Each of the, you see like two different, sugar-like structures over here. See the hexagonal structure. So remember we were talking about glucose and those kinds of things before. Those have hexagonal structures. So this is kind of like a similar kind of thing, but it's going to have all other kinds of attachments and all kinds of other, things like that. So it looks kind of similar at first glance to sugars and to cellulose, but there are some other differences. Like for example, you see this nitrogen, CH3, C double bonded to O. There's other kinds of attachments and things that make this different. So over here on the bottom right, this shows, like if you take a cross section of a fungal cell wall, like what would it look like? Or it's cell membrane and cell wall. So chitin is this thing located right over here, right? So at the bottom over here, this right here is the cell membrane, right? Just like a bacteria has a cell membrane or an animal cell has a cell membrane. But the rest of this stuff on top of it, this is the cell wall, right? So you can see chitin is right here in the middle, right? So chitin is right here in the middle. So this is unique to fungi. So in some other organisms, they use chitin for other things, but in terms of the cell wall, this is not found in plants. This is unique to fungi. All right. So how do fungi reproduce? Like how do you take one, how does one organism reproduce and turn into others? So this right over here is showing you, some of the structure of, fungi. Like let's say a fungus is growing inside of this piece of bread or something like that. So, inside of the bread, the organism is connected together. You can see like it's all connected together from right to left and that kind of thing. So first of all, over here in this picture, what are they circling, right? It says here, many fungi have rhizoids. So rhizoids are root-like things, right? So they're not considered to be true roots like plants, right? So what do? They basically absorb water and nutrients, right? So however, they're not like plant, roots. They're different from plant roots because plant roots have vascular structures. So what are those vascular structures? Those are like tiny tubes and things that carry water and nutrients up and down the plant. So this is just like a lot more simple. You can think of it as this is like just a very, very simple kind of roots. All right. So this fungi is growing and it's obtaining nutrition from the rhizoids. All right. So fungi are mostly made up of a loose network of filaments called hyphae. So we're going to take a look at a better picture later. But basically the main part of the fungus is made up of all of these kind of lots and lots of millions and millions of filaments, like long pieces that group together to form something called mycelium. All right. So mycelium are basically like a whole bunch of hyphae, a whole bunch of these filaments called hyphae all grouped together. All right. And so how do the hyphae eat, right? They don't make their food like plants, right? They don't have like a mouth like animals to consume and digest things. So what do? So they release all kinds of enzymes into the environment, right? Just like an animal takes in food and has the enzymes and chemicals in the stomach to digest things. A fungi doesn't do that. It actually takes its enzymes and puts it out onto the food itself. And so when the food just becomes like all like liquidy and stuff like that, then it kind of like just takes up all of the particles of the food. So the digestion occurs outside of the fungus, not inside in like a stomach or something like that. All right. So right over here, right, you have this fungi, all right, and so you have first of all, at the top over here, right, we have a lot of like spores and stuff coming out, right. So this filament over here, right, is called a sporangiophore. So there's another picture that's better later on. So this right over here is kind of like a thin stalk, and it reaches outside of the food source. And then at the top, right, you have something called sporangiums, right? So we're going to take a look at another picture, sporangiophores, and then at the top you have sporangiums, and over here at the top, that's where the spores are produced. So the spores, right, are basically they reproduce by themselves, right? These are not like gametes where you need like a male and a female gamete to combine. Here, one spore by itself can go off and form like a new organism. Right, and then this right over here, this picture over here, on the bottom right is showing you some of these things. So you have at the bottom you have the rhizoids, right, the root-like structures. Right? So they're not true roots; they're just root-like structures. You have sporangiophores, and then at the top you have the sporangium, where the spores are produced. Now they're also connected together by this thing called like a stolon. So this right over here, all right, connects the organism together. So it says here, hyphae also form stolon that grow above the ground and connect with the stolon of neighboring fungi. All right. So so these stolon, they also assist with sexual reproduction. So mostly fungi reproduce just with spores, but sometimes they form gametes and things like that, and release and then release them in order to form new organisms. So this right over here is showing you that most of the time fungi, they reproduce in this way by just producing spores, right? But occasionally they form different kinds of gametes, and then kind of like a male and female fuse together, and then they form spores, and then the spores are different than the original kind of parent fungus. You could think about it in that way. Right. So this picture over here, right at the bottom, is showing you that you have this like mushroom, right? Right. So you have there's like a mushroom like sticking above the ground, and that's usually what you see. If you go outside, you see like mushrooms, but that's only part of the fungus. That's only the small portion of the fungi. Most of the fungi is down here below in the ground. All right, and all of this is called mycelium. Right, so it's composed of hyphae. All right, so hyphae, if you put all the hyphae together, you get mycelium. So that's what it means. So hyphae is a part of the mycelium. All right. Now, not all fungi reproduce using spores, right? So mostly when you think of fungi, you think of spores. Like if you have a bread mold, like some dust, some black dust comes off of it, or if you have a mushroom, if you hit it or something, right, a bunch of spores come out of the mushroom, right, stuff like that. But that's not the only way that fungi can reproduce, right? So some fungi, like yeast, right, they use budding. Right? So what does that mean? It just means that one cell kind of turns into two cells. Right? So one cell kind of turns into two cells. Right? Mm-hmm.
Where do yeasts come from?
I don't know where they come from. I guess they're just kind of floating around in the environment. So they're probably just kind of like in the dust and in the soils. Probably in the soil is probably where they naturally grow, and then so people take them and then use them for their own kind of purposes. All right, this is just talking about the diversity of the fungi kingdom. So it just means that, there's all different types of, fungi. So over here on the bottom, we're kind of seeing, different kinds of mushrooms and that kind of thing. So just one example of how there's all different kinds of fungi. Right. Over here you have, so we're going to talk about 4 different kinds of fungi. Right. So the first one we have is club fungi. Right. So club fungi is kind of what you normally think about when you think about fungi. So these club fungi, they form these, large mushrooms, and they release all kinds of spores from them in order to, and they will go and they will, reproduce and form new organisms, right? So this right here, so club fungi is usually what you think about when you think about fungi. So on the bottom of the mushroom, there's a place called gills. So because they look kind of like fish gills, and that's where, so basically just like lines and lines of gills, and inside of there's all kinds of spores and stuff like that, right? Now the second type is called sac fungi. So a lot of these are actually edible. So we have truffles, morels, cup fungi, and yeasts. All of these are called sac fungi, and some of these are edible. So they carry their spores in something called asci, which are microscopic structures of their fruiting bodies, right? So the structure in which they're keeping their spores is different, and so that's why they're classified differently from club fungi. And I think usually they don't form mushrooms, that are as impressive as the club fungi. So these ones over here, so this one in the top left, this is like kind of classically what they sort of show you, that this is some kind of morel mushroom. So that one looks very different from the sac fungi. I mean the club fungi. All right, the third type is called imperfect fungi. So what does this mean? Like, why is it called imperfect? So scientists, they can't really figure out exactly how they are reproducing. And so that's why they call it imperfect fungi. So one of the species within this group is a fungus that produces the antibiotic penicillin. So there were some scientists who so one time he was growing some bacteria in the lab, and then there's like contamination, some fungus came from somewhere and started growing on the plate that he was growing the bacteria on. And you notice that no bacteria would grow around that fungus that was growing. So we realized that there's some chemical that this fungus is producing that's killing bacteria. And so he started studying it, and they isolated that chemical and turned it into an antibiotic and then sold it. So this is like a microscopic picture of imperfect fungi. So there's not too many pictures that you can find for this this type, but this is one picture. You also have something called zygote fungi. So this is normally what you think about when you see like bread mold. So if you see bread mold, then probably it's a zygote fungi. All right. So what they do is they produce spores. All right. And they produce these are usually microscopic, and usually they produce spores in order to reproduce. So this is basically what they kind of look like. You can see that they have the sporangiophore with the sporangium at the end, right? You see these like white clear stalks, and then at the top you have the black circles. So that's where all those spores are located at the very end. And then this is like a microscopic picture. So here you can see that over here at the end, it's like filled with spores over here at the end. All right, so this is basically like a microscopic picture of a bread mold. All right. So also fungi, they also work together with many different kinds of organisms. So fungi, they can live by themselves, or they can work together with other organisms. So if you ever saw like lichens on the trees and stuff like that, right? So these are lichens on the trees, right? And so they come in all different kinds of varieties. But what are lichens? They're basically kind of like a mutualistic relationship between fungus and algae. So over here on the right, you see the like kind of like a diagram of what it looks like if you look at it. So most of it is made, looks like it's made of fungus, but then you have algae in it as well, and the algae produces food. And so the fungus uses the food that the algae produces. And then in turn, the fungus provides like protection as well as, brings water and nutrients easily to the algae. And so the fungi and algae, they basically work together. All right, so this is called a lichen. So if it benefits both organisms, this is called mutualism. All right, so lichen is like a mutualistic kind of organism. It helps both the algae and the fungus. So fungi, they have many roles in ecosystems. So fungi are decomposers, right? So they're decomposers because they break down dead organisms and other kinds of decaying organic matter and then return the nutrients back into the ground. So any plant or animal is filled with all kinds of nutrients. And so, when the animal dies, then all those nutrients have to be released back into the soil so that new plants and animals can grow and use those nutrients. Right? So that's mostly what fungi do. So over here it says here that they are decomposers, they recycle nutrients. Right? In addition, we talked about how they work together with lichens. They form lichens with algae. So at the bottom, another way that they work together is they work together with plants. So we're going to talk about some of the different ways that fungi work together in the ecosystem. So the first one is about an anthill. So ants consume fungi when they eat leaves and plants. So the world around you is filled with fungi. So when they bring it back to the anthills, then the fungus starts to grow inside the anthill, and it helps to keep the mound from collapsing. Right? So the mound is made of sand, so it could just easily collapse, but the fungi that starts to grow starts to help to keep it, more solid, instead of just turning it back into sand. And so that way the ants can live inside of the anthill and it doesn't just immediately collapse. Right? So tree trunks, right? So termites, right? They eat wood, and so wood is made of cellulose, right? So inside of their digestive system, they have fungi, right? And so the fungi, they actually helps the termite to digest the wood, right? Like most creatures, they cannot just eat wood and digest it. Right? It's very difficult to digest wood. So, but termites, they have fungi inside of their system, and so that's why they're able to digest it. In the soil, of course, the soil is filled with fungi, so the fungi break down all kinds of dead organisms and allow, and then return nutrients back to the soil.
Is there any charges here?
Yeah, there might be one. I'm not sure which one though.
Does that make sense?
Mhm. So this over here is just showing you that inside of the soil, there's many different kinds of creatures, and so fungi are one of the organisms that are here decomposing dead things. So when some kind of earthworm or something dies, then the fungus has to turn it back into soil. All right. So people use fungi in their gardens. So we're going to take a look at a picture of that, and we'll take a look at the picture now. So over here, we see over here, so what is this showing? This is showing that on the left and the right, there's some kind of difference in terms of the fungus that grows. So the one on the left has a lot of fungi, right? And this fungi is in association with the roots of the plant, which is some kind of a grass or something that's growing there. So the grass sends down roots into the soil because it wants to pick up nutrients and that kind of thing. And so the fungi, right, it's hyphae and everything, it kind of grows around the roots. And so that actually benefits the plant because the fungi decomposes things and it breaks things down into simpler and simpler nutrients that makes it easier for the plant to pick it up. So you see on the left, there's a lot of fungi. On the right, there's not much fungi. And so with this kind of fungi, the plant grows better. So on the left, it's like a little bit thicker in terms of its growth compared to on the right. And this is showing the same thing. So this right over here shows that when this fungus is present around the roots, it helps the plant to grow. So the one on the right, those plants are actually obviously growing better than the smaller plants on the left. So sometimes when when farmers spray antifungals, chemicals that kill the fungus, they spray it because there's some kind of fungal disease on the plant leaves and stuff like that. So some fungi, they can cause those kinds of diseases. But when they spray it, if they spray too much, then what happens is that the chemical goes into the soil and also kills the beneficial fungi as well. So it doesn't just kill the fungi that's causing problems, it also kills off the beneficial fungi. So that can actually be detrimental to the health of the plants. Okay. Also, it's just pointing out over here, second of all, kitchen of a house. So people use fungi to make all kinds of things, all kinds of foods. People use yeast, for example, to make bread, and all kinds of other things that people use to make food. We talked about antibiotics before. So some fungi, they make different chemicals that are useful to kill bacteria. So there are some antibiotics that are made up of they're made from the chemicals that are released by fungi. All right, and then lastly, what is it saying? It's saying that without fungi and fungus-like protists, it will be up to bacteria to fill a large portion of the decomposer role in ecosystems. Right? So bacteria also, decompose a lot of things, but fungi are, simply better at decomposing things. So fungi are multicellular; they spread quickly, and they consume plenty with this digestive enzyme. So most bacteria, they don't release the kind of digestive enzymes that fungi release into the environment. So fungi are so without fungi, there will still be other decomposers that take things and turn them back into soil, but it just wouldn't be as efficient as with fungi. So fungi, they are better at breaking down all this decaying matter compared to more simple things like bacteria.